I got a question for you, Sam. In the 10 cases that we've taken so far, we were reactive. People got a ticket. They were sort of random people out there. And we took the cases because they were typically working class folks. They didn't have $1,000. The cases were egregious. So that's reactive. And I feel really good about those cases, but I don't know if any of them are going to really change the world other than a moral victory in helping one person. But are there any things that you found in the law that would allow us to go proactively to fight for the ability of a barbershop to reopen or a restaurant to reopen? Is there something we can do in the name of a larger group of people that would have a more symbolic or precedent-setting win? I guess what I'm saying is I'm so proud of what we've done fighting the fines so far, but is there anything we can do in the legislation, challenging some ban here, challenging a ban there, that would free not one person, but maybe hundreds or thousands?
So yes and no, Ezra. A lot of people automatically sort of assume that the charter will protect us. And I've been a little bit agnostic about that because I recognize, as you may also realize, that we don't have absolutes in Canada, absolute rights in Canada, or at least the absolute rights that we have in Canada are not the ones that we would normally think. All the rights of freedom of expression, assembly, association, and so on that we think we have, and that we do have, are not absolute. The state could always override them by saying that there is this greater goal out there that we need to justify. In this case, freedom of religion, for example, telling people that they can't gather in homes, synagogues, and so on, would be that freedom of religion would be override by the fact that Section 1, the goal is to flatten the curve. That was the purpose of it. Now, you had a case coming out being launched by the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms about that person, the preacher in Aylmer, who said that he had the right to perform his services in the parking lot. People would stay in their cars, and his services would be broadcast in FM. The government, interesting enough, backed down, changed the definition of what a gathering was, and allowed him to continue doing that. I don't think that's necessarily a win for freedom of religion. And the reason why is because I think what happened there is, if you read the section of the Emergency Measures Civil Protection Act of Ontario, there's three built-in, amongst many limitations, there's three limitations specifically to that act. And one of the limitations is it says that everything that act has to be minimally intrusive on our rights. So I really think what happened in there is, instead of going to the charter, the government itself realized that internally in the act itself says you have to be minimally intrusive. So I think what they did is they made their legislation more in accordance with the own legislation. And we've been talking about that. Some of the legislation, I think, is not minimally intrusive. So instead of going to the charter and relying upon charter arguments, which can be very risky, I think you go directly to the EMCPA, and in that legislation, it has a built-in charter type of analysis to it. I think that's really the way that people should be going. That said, Ezra, I think what now has been happening is you have so many exceptions to the social distancing rules that two things are happening. One is people are beginning to think, well, why are there all these exceptions, right? I mean, there seems to be inconsistency with saying that essential service workers can have their children going to daycare, but other people can't go to daycare, right? How does that make sense at all? If the real concern is flattening the curve, certainly you're exposing a certain number of population to the virus. And there's other exceptions. So I think you're going to have now going forward a built-in problem of public support for the social distancing laws. I think you saw that in Trinity Bellwoods over the weekend in Toronto, big popular park here. A lot of people out just sunbathing. Our mayor, John Tory, had to go out the next day and chastise people for obeying the social distancing laws. And secondly, more important, I think, for us in dealing with fighting the fines, I think all these exceptions creates a legal problem for the government to justify how they can make an exception here, the non-exception here, specifically when the act itself says you have to be minimally intrusive. So there's a built-up legal pressure now, I think, to start relaxing things if people come forward with legal challenges to them. And that's something, again, that we're talking about. And when it's the appropriate time, we'll announce that. So I think those two things are happening in terms of going forward. You have people coming forward with some challenges, whether the JCCF realized what they were doing or not is beside the issue. But you have, I think, a breakdown in the public support for it with all these exceptions. And I think it'll cause legal problems going forward for the government.
That's an excerpt from my daily show, the Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.